David and I have recently had some episodes in the podcast that have really called into question the Ethereum endgame, the roadmap, a roadmap that has optimized the rollup centric view, layer twos, that kind of thing. Kyle Samani was a guest we had on. He basically says this prioritization, this roadmap, is the reason why ETH is down so bad relative to other assets this cycle. And he has his own bag bias, maybe, and his own preconceptions, of course. And we also had an episode with Max Resnick, who is a protocol developer as well. And his take was that the Ethereum roadmap is off track. And we went through an episode with him where he sort of describes it. Now, your take, I think, is contrary to those two takes. You think the ETH roadmap, as it is pretty great. We're going to discuss why you think that. But let me start with the broadest of questions. Why is the ETH roadmap great?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start by kind of setting the framing for this episode. And I guess I wrote this article called Ethesis, which is a portmanteau of like ETH and thesis, right? So this is kind of my first stab at having a bigger picture understanding of what makes Ethereum valuable as a platform, and also like considering Ether the asset kind of along a bunch of different dimensions, including the rollup centric roadmap. So that's kind of like where we're at. And I do want to say, kind of before jumping into kind of how I think, that this is very much a personal opinion. Like that is kind of an op-ed of sorts. And so I don't want to like say that I'm speaking on behalf of the EF or on the whole Ethereum community. This is just like one person's perspective, but yeah, hopefully can help voice some of the arguments that I think are true and that a lot of people might resonate with. So yeah, I guess to start, the kind of framing I used in the article was settlement, DA, execution in that order. And so Max brought up this really good point, which is, we only have a limited amount of kind of bandwidth, both in terms of how much network capacity we can handle, like kind of on the physical layer. But then there's also this like this bandwidth in terms of what we as an Ethereum community can ship in terms of protocol upgrades. And so kind of, I think it's totally accurate and valid to be thinking a big picture about how to prioritize upgrades and changes. And in my article, I say that I think settlement is kind of first and foremost the priority. This is kind of the fundamentals of ETH as properties, digital property rights. And a lot of that take was kind of inspired by the Bankless thesis, triple point asset thesis, et cetera. Then the second is kind of a deep dive on DA, and kind of beyond just thinking about DA in terms of fees and in terms of the value accrual to ETH asset. I think it's also worth exploring some of the nuance of DA in terms of what it provides to rollups, in terms of composability, in terms of network effects, these types of things. And also just like making abundant block space, and kind of as we usher in this new era of truly decentralized access to this blob space and block space, like what could be built out in the future. And then execution kind of as the third thing, but still very much something we should consider doing. And that's kind of focused on L1 execution, how that plays into the future of ZK and scaling the base layer. And that's relationship to, I guess, maybe more of the value accrual arguments that people are very familiar with in terms of the burn, et cetera. So yeah, I'd say that's kind of the flow of the argument and what I hope we can cover today.
Yeah, I think this episode does assume some knowledge. So we're diving right into 300 level Ethereum crypto content. So Bankless listener, we'll include in the link some resources where if you don't know what settlement, DA, and execution kind of are, like some other episodes that will help you out on those terms. But I think in order to dive in the deep end of the pool, we have to assume some common knowledge across Bankless listeners today with those terms. And I'll just note that you said settlement, DA, and execution in that order. That's roughly what the existing Ethereum roadmap kind of prioritizes. And I'll contrast that with what Max and others have been kind of saying, which is like, okay, we did some settlement in DA. Now we have to go swing back towards execution and really focus on that for the Ethereum layer 1 and make that a priority rather than settlement and data availability. So they would probably reorder what you just said and probably put execution first. Is that your impression of their message?
Yeah, it is. And I would say this type of kind of reversal and pendulum swinging back towards execution is totally valid and totally worth considering. But it does kind of fundamentally suggest the question of like, where do we expect user activity to take place? And I think kind of one of these core tensions that Max was getting at in his post or in his kind of writing and in the podcast was he very much wants like all the future of DeFi to take place on Ethereum L1, right? And so if if that's the premise, if that's where your starting point is for kind of viewing the Ethereum roadmap, then I totally agree with him. You have to start optimizing the L1 for execution, because as we've seen, like, activity is moving to the L2s and it is moving kind of away from the base chain. But I think the core thing that I disagree with him on, and it kind of I would reject a bit in terms of that premise, is that you can get the scalable execution on the L1 without compromising on the settlement and kind of the decentralization of the L1 in the first place. So his argument kind of rests on the assumption that multiple concurrent proposers and Braid and these kind of like new cool technology ideas will help keep the same level of decentralization and censorship resistance of the base chain while still allowing it to scale up. And I think, if that turns out to be true, like if that ends up being something that we can all agree on, then like full steam ahead, like let's go. But where I would push back is like, if we have any reason to believe that we're compromising on the decentralization and the kind of core premise of censorship resistance on the L1, then that's like a trade-off that doesn't make sense to make in terms of kind of like almost trying to give up what we're good at and chase something that we're not good at. And that feels like the fundamental pivot that would be kind of a strategic mistake as an ecosystem broadly.
As we stay kind of high level in the first part of this podcast, maybe it's useful to kind of articulate what the main goal of the Ethereum rollup centric roadmap is, what the North Star is. I think if you go and you look at that, those 5 different swim lanes of the Ethereum roadmap, the Verge, Burge, Scourge, all the urges. Splurge, yeah. It's pretty easy to kind of get lost in the sauce of like what each one of these things is doing. Oh, there's 5 different lanes, 5 different goals. Maybe you can weave the goals of Ethereum together. How would you describe the actual main goal of the rollup centric roadmap? What is the North Star?
Yeah, I think right now, the North Star is growing the amount of economic activity that takes place in the Ethereum ecosystem. And in the Ethereum ecosystem kind of includes L2s, rollups specifically, that use Ethereum DA. And so Donkrad had this really awesome point in a recent AMA where he said, like, before we can start thinking about like value accrual or like why ETH is going to be a long-term valuable asset, we have to think about value creation. And that value creation is going to come from people actually like getting on chain, using digital assets, swapping, sending money across borders, etc. So yeah, I think kind of first and foremost, the goal here should be to onboard more users and to increase activity on the L2s. And if you look at L2 Beat, like things are looking great on that angle, right? You look at like number of transactions, active addresses, volume on the L2s, and it's kind of like nothing but up and to the right. So I think that's fundamentally where we start, and that's, in my mind, still like the number one goal of what Ethereum should be doing. And that's why when we're looking forward to the kind of next phases of these hard forks, stuff like Peer DAS, stuff like full dank sharding, which continue to optimize for like creating this abundant block space, are still very high on the priority list, because I think everyone's under the assumption that, sure, like DA is cheap right now, but we're going to hit this point of growth where Ethereum needs to keep scaling the DA fast enough to keep up with the demand for that block space. So yeah, I think kind of fundamentally increasing the amount of economic activity in and around the Ethereum ecosystem is the goal right now. And I guess the last thing I'll add here is that the kind of core principle of preserving the neutrality of Ethereum block space is the other kind of counter argument for, and kind of the force that is also working in terms of making sure that, MEV doesn't result in a highly centralized and censored chain.
To maybe articulate what I think you said, we created, with Bitcoin, we created this thing called Blockspace, secure Blockspace. Now, ever since Bitcoin, we've been learning what to do with it. Then the Ethereum project comes along with smart contracts, and we can do even more things with Blockspace. And I think maybe what you're saying with Dankrad's take is, with cheap data availability with layer 2s, we have so much cheap block space, and now we have surface area for people to do things that create value for the world with this thing that we've created called block space. And optimizing for value creation by leveraging secure block space is the correct North Star of the Ethereum roadmap. Let's increase the Ethereum GDP by giving people, block space consumers, the tools that they need to create as much value as possible. using the high quality block space that Ethereum has. And in order to preserve high quality block space, we need to have strong censorship resistance mechanisms. We need to make sure that MEV doesn't corrupt the chain. And that's why we're kind of focusing on some of the things that we're focusing on in 2024. Is that a way to articulate the summarized point?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's also kind of a nice element here that comes in, which is as scaling kind of increases on the L2s and as some of this tech evolves and ZK EVMs continue to kind of increase at this astounding rate, some of that execution scaling and kind of the more long-term futuristic, I guess, sci-fi chain stuff that Justin would talk about can kind of come into the fold kind of as it becomes ready. So I think, again, this is like part of Ethereum superpower is like the ability to kind of scale trustlessness and scale decentralization while still absorbing all of the awesome open source tech and kind of magic cryptography that gets built out in the system.
If you enjoyed all of that, then you'll absolutely love the Bankless newsletter. Join over 300,000 fellow readers, all for free. Click below to sign up.